Hello, my name is Mallory Jenna Robinson. Join me on A Hateful Homicide, a true crime podcast dedicated to telling the stories regarding the murders of transgender, gender non-binary, and gender diverse community members in the United States and abroad. This is A Hateful Homicide.
911, what's your emergency?
Yeah.
A transgender woman has been shot and killed in North Baltimore. Alpha?
In the U.S., trans women of color have a life expectancy of just 35 years.
This happens on a daily. Another one of my friends got killed right up the street from here.
These cases are true. The victims are real, and their voices matter. This is A Hateful Homicide. The murder of Claire Legato. Monday, April 15th, 2019. Cleveland, Ohio.
Justice for my child. I want justice for the transgender community.
The family is calling on the county and the feds to open up an investigation, believing this to be a hate crime.
I want the community to know that our lives matter, that we're not just disposable.
The transgender community holding up their own candles as they fear who could be next.
Our lives shouldn't be ripped from us like this.
This couple traveling all the way from California, supporting a family they've never met, but standing up to violence they know all too well.
This can't go on. This has to stop. People have to be aware of what's happening and to really start thinking of trans people as human beings.
It's Monday, April 15th, 2019, in the city of Cleveland. It's about 4 a.m. in the morning when 21-year-old transgender female Claire Legato wakes up to hearing an argument between her mother and her stepfather, 61-year-old cisgender male John Charles Boothe. Claire woke up that morning hearing her mother, who shall remain anonymous, and her stepfather, John Charles Boothe, arguing about a tax refund check. This had began around the early part of 2019 when they first filed their taxes. Claire's mother, who was under the impression that her boyfriend had received the tax money and had then spent it for himself, confronts her partner. And as they're getting into this argument about this tax refund, Claire wakes up. Again, it's Monday morning, it's 4 a.m. It's a spring day in Cleveland. Claire, who's 21, is getting ready to go back into college for cosmetology school just in several months. And so she's getting ready to take some exams. She had been studying for those. And then all of a sudden, she intervenes as her mother's keeper to intervene and speak up for her mom. And as a result, her mother's partner, again, 61-year-old John Charles Boothe, grabs his gun, a .22 caliber handgun, and has this heated exchange with Claire. And as they're arguing, Claire is defending her mother against John, who is now enraged that she's now confronting him about, her mother's tax refund. John shoots Claire once in the left side of the head. She falls to the ground instantly. Shots have been heard throughout this city, and the community immediately calls 911. You can hear Claire's mother screaming for help and neighbors awakening. Some were already getting ready that morning for work, as it was 4 a.m., and can recall the franticness of the mother, and also recalling John Charles Boothe just getting up and leaving. And so, as we delve into this case, again, welcome my audience. Thank you for being here with me today. And I wanted to just take a moment and talk about Claire, and this hateful homicide that happened on the morning of April 15th of 2019. Like another one of our cases before, especially our season 2, episode 3, the murder of Letitia King, Claire too would be shot and then unfortunately placed in a medically induced coma for about a month. And she finally succumbs to her injuries on Tuesday, May 14th. And again, this was just about 5 months shy of what would have been her 22nd birthday. And so, we have to ask ourselves as a group, like, how did a situation between her mother and her stepfather all of a sudden lead to Claire being brutally shot just once in the head, laying on the ground, bleeding out, ultimately rushed to the Cleveland Memorial Hospital, placed on life support after undergoing surgery for several hours to have the bullet removed. Her mother waiting by her bedside, her cousins, as we're going to hear testimony from him as well. This homicide, this hateful homicide of Claire, we have to ask ourselves, right? John and Claire, their relationship as stepfather, stepdaughter, mother's partner, mother's daughter, however we want to frame that. We have to take a look in this case and understand what led to this man, 61-year-old man, who had been a father figure, who had been somewhat of, a mentor to Claire for several years, from the time of meeting Claire's mother to knowing that Claire identified as a trans woman. From what we understand, that John Charles Boothe was relatively, okay or tolerant, of quote unquote tolerant of Claire. And so there wasn't necessarily this history of like contention between them. But, Claire did live at home with her mom as a 21-year-old Black trans woman, and she did have that support from her mom as well. And so that was a package deal. Claire's mom made that perfectly clear. And again, as you heard in the beginning of the audio, you could hear the anguish of Claire's mom wanting justice for her daughter, as well as justice for the community. I'm also, throughout this case, going to share some important information from our Transgrio founder, Monica Roberts, who really had a conversation, may she rest in peace, had a really pivotal conversation in 2019, just a few months after Claire's death. I also want to make mention that Claire Legato's death is going to tie into a few episodes down the line with our finale of the murder of Malaysia Booker. And so those cases are literally simultaneously, because you have Claire, who is, fatally shot on April 15th and then placed in a coma and then ultimately released from that medically induced coma and placed off of life support on that Tuesday, May 14th. And then within several days, you have in Dallas, Texas, the murder of Malaysia Booker. And so that's going to, kind of plot twist reveal. That's going to be our season finale. But we see this violence in 2019 more so than before. And we've talked about other years too, like 2018 with the murder of Kelly Stowe and how these cases have continued to rise. But for some reason, particularly in 2019, the year 2019, there was this astronomical growth of trans violence, especially specifically towards Black trans women in metropolitan cities like Cleveland, like Detroit. A lot of them were at the hands of, dating violence gone wrong. But then in this case here, which really stood out to me, was that you had this, again, vibrant 20-year-old healthy trans woman who was getting ready, who was asleep, hearing her mother and her stepfather disagree about, of all things, money. And she wanted to get up and just, again, be her mother's keeper, support her, speak up, just let John know to back up, get away. This conversation is leading to a violent confrontation. And so, unfortunately, though the violence didn't happen, it's unfortunate that the violence happened towards Claire, but also when you look at this, it's like she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's also what's unfortunate too, because we have to think about, how this could have unfolded. People have asked, where did John get the gun? Did he have one? Was this gun already present? Did he have it on him? Well, according to Claire's mother, again, who has been just so traumatized from this, as this is still a relatively new case, and there's still, some proceedings with that going, especially because when John initially shot Claire around 4 a.m. on April 15th, he then fled the home. And so there was an intense search for him, and they did ultimately capture him and arrest him and charge him with felonious assault. And that was around April 16th of 2019, that Tuesday when he was captured. And so you had from that 16th of April until that Tuesday of May 14th, where his charges were just felonious assault. He was not allowed to be released on bail, though he didn't have much of a criminal record. But because of the severe nature of Claire's wounds, just the sheer brutality of being able to just shoot this 21-year-old girl who identified also in a way as his stepdaughter, the prosecutors felt that he would be a flight risk. And so he was again in jail when Claire was taken off life support. And then those charges were dismissed from felonious assault to second-degree murder. And so, again, as we go through this case, it's really heartbreaking because we have these conversations about the violence towards our Black trans women. And then again, how does this correlate into the day-to-day lives that we go through as Black trans folks? We are going to school, as we continue to talk about this case, we're going to get some, testimony. I'm going to, provide some quotes from, Claire's godmother, as well as a really good high school friend. And so you really get this, characterization of Claire and who she was to people and how she really impacted those around her. And you could hear again in the beginning of the episode, her mother's anguish and wanting that justice. And also just the impact of the violence of this case and how it led from people traveling right abroad, coming from other states to this candlelight vigil. And so, again, I wanted to share with you all that Claire, according to her best friend Fred, stated, once you got to know her, she was basically that best friend you always wanted when you were growing up. When you were going through something, she knew how to make you feel better. And so, you get this kind of idea, this really delved idea into who Claire is, her character, about how she can make others feel better. And I think what's essential about that is that she always wanted to make people feel better. And that's what she was doing that morning of April 15th, right? There was no intent of her hurting her stepfather. There was no intent of her, trying to de-escalate the situation that would result in her being shot. It was really just her realizing, hey, it's early in the morning. You two have been arguing now for several hours. I have woken up to this. I just want to get some sleep before I have to go and take these tests for cosmetology school. And all of that was taken away just within a 3-minute argument with her stepfather about just telling him to back off from her mom. And so, again, it's just really heartbreaking because Claire just really, really was so fun. And so, I just wanted to take a moment and talk a little bit about Claire Legato. Again, she was born in November of 1997. And again, her hateful homicide happened just 4 months before her birthday. And I share that with you all to give you an idea of what Claire was looking forward to. She had actually started to prepare for her 22nd birthday. She was a planner. She liked to be able to have this sense of idea of what was going to happen in her life. And so she was really preparing to get herself back on track. She had taken some time to just really focus on herself and figure out what she wanted after high school. And so her godmother, her mother, her friends had all encouraged her to get back into school because she was really good at doing hair. She was also just really good at connecting with people, which is really important with doing hair. And so they thought that it was time for her to get back in there. And so while she's getting ready to go back into cosmetology school, in lieu of that, she's also planning her 22nd birthday. And so again, as you heard the quote from her friend Fred, he was really helpful with preparing for that. And so they were actually going to meet later that week to go over a potential venue and all of that stuff, as her birthday was near the Thanksgiving holidays. And so so, it was really just this sense of like what was lost. And you're going to hear a little bit of that in a moment from, again, Monica Roberts, talking about these lives that are cut short, these young lives of our Black trans women specifically being cut short. And of course, our brown and indigenous trans women too, but really this high number specifically towards our Black trans women. And I think also for myself as a Black trans woman, you can't help but wonder, what is it about our specific demographic, right? Our marginalization that makes us such a threat that would then result in the hateful homicide. Did John see Claire, this 5'5", 115-pound, slender, female, what threat did he see from her? Again, him standing at 5'11", 190 pounds, this 61-year-old cisgendered man, and he targets this trans woman who was, all she was trying to do was defend her mother. And so what really triggered him, right? And that's where, I think we have to take a look into the psychology and psychopathy of John. His characterization, according to a psychiatrist who, and the psychiatrist is Dr. Flynn Thompson. And Dr. Flynn Thompson talks about an interview that he did with John Charles Boothe. This would have been around February of 2020, just about 9 months after Claire's hateful homicide. And in the interview he does with John, because John and his defense team was stating that, there was financial stress in the home, and John, who was kind of in between employment and all of that. So by that morning of April 15th of 2019, John was under immense pressure. And between Claire's mother, who he had been arguing with since around 1:30 that morning, and then you have Claire, who intervenes around 3:57 a.m. According to Dr. Thompson, John snaps. He felt very targeted. He felt very tag-teamed by both Claire and her mother, according to him. And this resulted in him taking the gun out of his back pocket that he had on him, right? So we asked earlier, what was that gun? It was on him. And he then pulls it out and shoots Claire. Dr. Thompson asked John why Claire and not necessarily her mother, who he had been arguing with for about 2 hours. Well, John expressed that him and Claire, though they tolerated each other and got along to some degree, he was uncomfortable with her gender identity. And, I think for him, according to Dr. Thompson in his notes, he quotes saying that, John Charles Boothe is a danger to society, that he has this rage in him that at any given moment, again, if released, could be a danger to society. When we look at the arrest report of John Charles Boothe, this man who doesn't really necessarily have a criminal history, but he did back in the mid-1980s, around 1986, he did actually have an exchange with a cisgendered woman and pulled a gun on her. It was a robbery attempt, but he was arrested for that and pled guilty and ultimately was released in 1991. And so that is kind of the only notable police charge on his record. I mean, there were some tickets and things of that nature throughout the years, but that was the kind of the most violent thing. And so, but what that shows us is that John has a propensity of using guns, and that he carries a gun, and that he had a gun on him that morning of April 15, 2019 in Cleveland, Ohio. The home that Claire and John and Claire's mother all shared was on East 147th Street, north of St. Clair Avenue in the Collinwood neighborhood. The Collinwood neighborhood is a unit of Metro housing units, and this is where Claire, her mother, and her stepfather, John, were all residing that morning when the hateful homicide occurred. And so, it's really pivotal when we think about how John just could not handle Claire, this young woman, 40 years his junior, we have to be mindful of, confronting him And, and Claire's mother talks about that exchange briefly as she was being interviewed early on the scene and also at the Cleveland Police Department. And she was asked by Detective Paul Magny, what happened? What led to this conflict? And of course, Claire's mother states that John and her had got into an argument that morning. She had been asking him for a while where was the tax return, according to the bank records, bank statements. There had been a deposit because they had a shared bank account, her and John. And so she had noticed a deposit a few days prior, around April the 9th. And so she confronts John that Monday morning, as she stated that there was bills and things that were due, and John said that he was going to give her some money from the tax refund. Claire's mother had also been included in that tax refund process, so she definitely felt like, as someone who shared the household with John, was entitled to part of that money. John disagreed. The two argued intensely, loudly, according to other witnesses in the metro units who could hear statements such as, "You owe me, bills are due, you need to step up." John, you could hear him stating that it's my damn money, I do with it as I please, I'll give you some when I feel like it, or if I feel like it. So these are some of the exchanges that Detective Magny is getting right on the scene, as Claire's body is being then, at this time around 4:45 a.m., been escorted to Cleveland Memorial Hospital. And so again, you have Detective Magny and his team who are interviewing Claire's mother and other witnesses. Again, we had people around this Monday morning who were getting ready for work. Some were actually getting ready to leave their home when the shot rang out, and again called 911. There are at least 10 911 calls that morning regarding the hateful homicide, or at least at that time, the hateful shooting of Claire. And so, this tragedy that unfolds is just it's troublesome, because it's a growing rise of what we see amongst really our cisgender men. These are, again, and we've talked about this terminology of cisgender, and for my audience who may not know what that terminology means, for us as trans folks, we have always felt othered. And so one of the things that we've created is inclusive language, and also other medical professionals too have supported this inclusive language with using terminology such as cisgender to identify those who were born within the body that they identify, and the gender identity that they identify, but also still expresses and lives and identifies that way to this day. So John was born male, and he still identified as male, making him cisgendered male. So I just wanted to reiterate that as well for any of the audience who may not know what cisgender means. So John, this cisgendered male, of privilege too, we have to also look, yes, he is a black man, but he is also a black man of privilege. He had not a business, but he did also have like this delivery service that he would do occasionally, like food delivery service, and then he also drove a taxi around as well. So he had some resources, and he also was misogynistic. He did not believe in any woman, cis or trans, confronting him, especially about things such as money or how the household was ran. John's ex-wife also stated in an interview later on, again in 2020, about her relationship with John back in the early 90s after he was released from prison. And she talked about this ability of John to be charming, but he also wanted to control the money. And when he had lost that control or confronted about the lack of resources or finances that he was supposed to provide, he would become enraged. And sometimes, according to his ex-wife, Sheila Booth Murphy, she stated that John would then grab her by the arms and pin her down, and yell at her and tell her not to confront him. So again, you can, and this wasn't documented. She never reported this to authorities, so we don't have a police record of this attack on her, but we do have her testimony that was placed into interrogation during the interrogation that she had with Detective Mackey. So you get this, again, this idea of what John is capable of. And Claire's mother also testified to Detective Mackey about this violence that John could display when confronted. So she recalls that morning when Claire got up, and just maybe a minute or two before John pulls out the gun, because she said it just, they were arguing. Claire was telling John to, leave, her alone. She's defending her mother, and all of a sudden the gun is pulled out and John just shoots. But prior to the gun being pulled out and fired, she tells Claire to just go back to bed. Go back to bed. She will handle it. And before she could even finish that statement, as she's looking at Claire, she all of a sudden sees her child on the ground. And then she sees the man that she has loved for years flee and run off. And this woman, again, I understand why she wants justice, because this has to be a very traumatizing for her to know that her partner, her husband, common law husband, murdered one of her children, a child that she loved and supported and accepted and lived with her, and she's gone. And so this has just been very, very overwhelming for the mother in this case. And I just, I have to just really, again, just state the importance of these conversations that we have to have as folks and community members of the LGBTQIA+. I also want to delve into just a little bit more information from, if you all remember season 1, a good friend of mine, Raven Noah. She also does a lot of podcasting, more video podcasting. You can check her out on YouTube. But she also covered a little bit about Claire's case. And I just wanted to also give you a little bit of her input on this case, this hateful homicide of Claire Legato.
She was only 21 years old, and it was Claire Legato. She was 21, and she's from Cleveland, Ohio. I want to share this story with you as far as it being shot by a guy named John, 61 years old. Allegedly, he's the man that basically the state that killed her. There has been an arrest warrant searching for him. I want to check this out.
His name was Claire Legato, and she was only 21 years old. And she's a trans woman, passes away after a fatal shot dead. Now, a heated argument over a tax check led to the shooting. Now, this story is being reported on May the 15th, 2019. A trans woman passed away yesterday, May the 14th, after a man allegedly shot her in the head just months before in Cleveland, Ohio. Claire Legato, 21 years old, suffered life-threatening injuries and was treated at University Hospital, but just days under a month later, she died. Authorities charged John Boothe, 61, in felonious assault in connection with the shooting and issued a warrant for his arrest. Now, what happened? According to the Cleveland.com Ohio, the shooting occurred around 4 a.m. on Monday, the 15th or April. Now, Claire was in the front yard at the home on East 147th Street, North or South Claire Avenue, in the city Collinwood neighborhood. An argument allegedly broke inside of the home between her mother and John. Claire's mother accused John of stealing her tax check. Now, the police report says, moreover, arguments heated up, and a 21-year-old mother confronted John, police say. Afterwards, she went outside, and John proceeded to allegedly shoot her in the head. Now, however, just a day after, exactly a month after the incident, Claire remembers the page reported by her passing on May 15th. Now, moreover, the argument heated up as the 21-year-old mother confronted John. Police says afterwards she went outside and basically John allegedly shot her in the head. Now, other reports state this. I want to read this part to you as well. It says that Cleveland, Ohio argument over a tax return check led to a transgender woman being shot in the head. Police say the 21-year-old woman suffered life-threatening injuries and is being treated at University Hospital. According to police, John Boothe, 61 years old, charged with a felony assault connection with the shooting, and a warrant hasn't been issued for his arrest. The shooting happened at 4 a.m. on a Monday in the front yard of 147th Street. I already said that part already. Now, the argument broke out inside of the home between Boothe and the 21-year-old woman mother. The mother accused John of stealing her tax check. Police says the argument became heated and the 21-year-old confronted John. Police says she went outside and Boothe shot her in the head, according to the police report. So, basically, she was defending her mother. Because what happened to her mother? She was defending her mother. And allegedly, John shot her. It was over income tax check. Allegedly, he stole it. And she protected her mother. The argument was over income tax check. Led to the shooting of a transgender woman, 21 years old, suffered life-threatening injuries, shot her in the head, and killed her. And for what? For what? Now, I don't know if she was the boyfriend or not. He was the boyfriend. John Boothe, 61 years old, is being charged with felony assault and connected.
And so you can hear from Raven Noah, right? This anguish. She too identifies as a Black trans woman. And I think what we have to remember from this case, and it was important for her to repeat that over and over again, because I think what we have to understand as a community, again, is this violence. In 2019, we saw at least 30 trans women, trans folks, gender non-conforming people, murder trans masculine individuals. And out of that number, 22 were Black trans women. And that number includes Claire Legato. And again, this was all over something as minute, something as trivial, as insignificant, really down the line when we look at this, right, as a tax refund check. Of course, when Raven Noah was reading this is audio clippings from the initial reports back in 2019. So since then, fast forward to 2021, John has been charged with second-degree murder. He is currently awaiting trial. Due to the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, he is still, sitting in custody, awaiting trial, and we are assuming from what we have heard from his defense attorney that is looking like between 2022 and 2023 as they continue to modify their COVID protocols and especially prioritizing their cases. With that being said, it's a concern that Claire's case could take a long time for justice to be served. And what you heard at that candlelight vigil in the beginning of this episode was Claire's mother wanting justice for her daughter, because there hasn't been yet. John is still just awaiting trial. He hasn't even had a court date placed yet. There's a possible date for 2022, maybe January of 2023. So you're still looking at least over a year before he would even go to trial. And hopefully that would result in the conviction, because from what we have learned from his defense attorneys is that they're trying to argue that Claire was being aggressive, that she confronted him. John has also stated recently that in recent interviews with his attorney that was provided just a little bit of testimony without them giving away too much of the case, but he felt his life was in danger. And so this resulted in him shooting Claire. So that is the defense. or part of the defense that he is planning to use. And so again, this is what we talk about in these cases very often, about the blaming of the victim. And you can see that John is picking up on that same cue, like a lot of our other perpetrators who just cannot face the truth and face the reality that they did something horrible to someone simply for being who they are. And it has nothing to do with anything else. It has nothing to do with them not disclosing. It has nothing to do with them not, or them being violent. These are excuses that are used very often. And unfortunately, they are also justifications in our justice system, to where our community, especially Black trans women, do not get justice in these cases. So we are definitely going to continue to root for justice in this case. But this hateful homicide, again, it really grappled me just because of the fact that, like you heard Raven Noah say, she was defending her mother. And for us as Black trans women to have the love of your family, the support of a family member, especially one like a parent, that is essential. And we have to understand that Claire and her mother were very close. And so you have this loss that this mother has to face, all because her daughter was trying to defend her. And Claire's mother has stated in a few interviews that she blames herself. She blames herself daily. She thinks to herself, if she would have just, not argued with John at the home, or if she would have waited till later, she said she'd rather it had been her. There is also, with the prosecutors, they plan to also have a little bit of Claire's mother's testimony, as well as his ex-wife Sheila's, to talk about this violence that he has and that he had. And so with that being said, Claire's mother was in fear of her life when Claire intervened, meaning that she had every right to be her mother's keeper and defend her mother. And so that is what the prosecutors plan to argue when this case goes to trial. But, I think it's important for us to also just take a look at, again, Claire and her vibrant personality. Her godmother quoted her as just being a ray of sunshine, that she loved to dance, that she played the clarinet, which is where she slightly got her name from, because of her love of the clarinet. She was very musically gifted, and also she could really dance. She had taken a little bit of tap and ballet, and so she was very flexible. And then she was really great at doing hair. Good friends from high school and classmates talked about her love of just, doing hair and just really being artistic and expressing herself in that way. And so again, you just see this young woman's life who was taken so shortly, cut so shortly and so heinously for simply just defending her mother. And again, what I want to do now is bring up a clip from, again, our very own Trans Griot. Again, we're so thankful for the Trans Griot for supporting A Hateful Homicide with the amazing blogs that they do. Shout out to Dee Dee Waters, who has taken on this amazing platform that Monica Roberts left us. But prior to Monica Roberts' death in 2020, so unfortunately it came out of nowhere, and so we still miss her, as it's been a year now since her passing. But prior to Monica's passing, just a year before in 2019, she talks about the violence towards Black trans women. And I think this is very essential to give you an understanding, because the Trans Griot, like A Hateful Homicide, does a lot of work into this violence and murder and hate crimes of our community of transgender, non-conforming, and gender expensive community members. So I wanted to give you all of this context of what the community has been dealing with, as well as what 2019 looked like.
The National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs had issued some data back in 2017, and in that report, they reported at least 27 hate violence homicides of transgender and gender nonconforming individuals. Of the 27, 24 were transgender women. Of the 24, 19 were Black transgender women. In 2018, the Human Rights Campaign also put out a report of their own in which they reported at least 26 known hate, violence, homicides of transgender individuals, and a majority, again, Black transgender women. And in 2019, we know of 22, and the year is not over, and again, the majority Black trans women. Sadly, for many of us who are sitting here, or who are watching, or who are just right outside of these doors, these are stats, it's data, it's headlines, but for both of you, it goes beyond that. This is your lived experience, a constant risk of violence. Let's break that down. Start with you, Monica.
Yeah, out of this year, the 22 that we know of, 21 are Black trans women. And of the 21, about 18 of them are under age 30. So that's a loss not only to our Black trans community, but it's a loss to society as a whole. What would these folks have been able to accomplish if they had been able to live to my age of 57? Did we lose the next great business idea? The cure for cancer? Or whatever these folks would have been able to accomplish had they had time to be able to do that. And the other aspect of this is that many of these murders are intimate partner violence. Let me say that again. They're intimate partner violence. So that's another conversation that we need to have.
And again, though this case with Claire was not necessarily an intimate partner violence scenario like we have seen in some of our other hateful homicides, this was still someone that she knew, someone that she trusted to an extent, that she shared a home with, she shared meals with, she shared her day with, you know, as someone who was like a father figure, a stepfather to her. And for him to have just shot her so callously in the head, this data that they were sharing for 2019, right? They started back in 2017 and led up to 2019. And again, that number, those 21 Black trans women that were murdered, and those 18 that were under 30, Claire was one of those 18 that Monica was referring to. So again, we don't know, right? When we talk about what could have been of Claire's life, could she have went on to play, you know, in an orchestra, a symphony with the clarinet, do hair, do both? We don't know. And that's the tragedy behind this, is that these lives are cut short, and we need to make sure that we continue to raise awareness and speak out and speak up against these. And so again, Transgender Day of Remembrance, which this is November, and Transgender Day of Remembrance is November 20th. And so as we prepare to go into Transgender Day of Remembrance, we're going to reflect this year on the lives that were lost, the trans and gender nonconforming lives that were lost for 2021. And these numbers are continuing to grow. And so again, with A Hateful Homicide, we're hoping to see, and please continue to share these stories, so that way people can understand that this epidemic, this plague of violence and hatred towards our community needs to stop, cease once and for all. But one last thing I want to share with you all as we prepare to conclude this case is just to give you again this idea of how these cases affect family members, loved ones of the victims. And so what I do is want to share from a cousin of Claire's. His name is Craig, and so I wanted to share just a little bit of his sentiments regarding the loss of his cousin.
It's just unfair to happen to her. She was an artist, and she used to live here, but she broke out, became super independent, which was really admirable. And having her loss is just terrible. Just hope that the person that needed out there finds it now.
And that is what he states, right? John Charles Boothe is currently awaiting trial for second-degree murder of Craig's cousin, Claire. And, you can hear Craig briefly mentioned, Claire being artistic, her being independent, about the time that she had moved out for a little bit, when she had first graduated high school, and again, being independent, but then ultimately moving back home to stay with her mother where the hateful homicide would happen. So again, as we prepare to conclude, I just want to say again, please, 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 listen to these cases with an open heart and open mind, and understand that this violence is real, and that these cases and that these victims' voices matter. And I just, again, thank you all so much for tuning in and supporting. And to Claire, our love bug, we remember you. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, forever, and always. We remember you. Born November 15th, 1997, and resting on since May 14th of 2019. Again, thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of A Hateful Homicide. My name is Mallory Jenna Robinson, your host. You can follow us on Instagram at A Hateful Homicide. You can also follow me at Mallory Jenna 90. Please take a listen on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and we are working on going to Amazon Podcasts as well. Yay! Fingers crossed and updated. And then our website, ahatefulhomicide.com, is currently being revised, and it will be ready to be reviewed within the next few weeks, and I will make a notification of that. Please use the hashtags A Hateful Homicide, Transgender Awareness, True Crime Podcast, Suspenseful Saturdays. Again, thank you all so much for tuning in on this Saturday, and please, I look forward to tuning in with you all next Saturday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you all so much, and have a great, and I mean great, day.